The massive ship hung in the darkness between stars, its hull gleaming with the cold light of distant suns. Inside the command center, Ambassador Kethvar studied the data flowing across his screens. His long fingers moved over the controls with practiced ease, reviewing the information his scouts had gathered from the small blue planet. Another primitive world, he muttered to himself. The readings were typical of what the Zephyrian hegemony called Class C species, bipedal creatures who had barely mastered fire-based propulsion. Their most advanced vessels could barely escape their own gravity well, perfect candidates for conquest and resource extraction. Kethvar had overseen 43 successful conquests in his career. The process was always the same. Send the ultimatum, wait for the inevitable surrender, harvest the useful resources, relocate any surviving natives to labor colonies in the Outer Rim. Simple and efficient. He activated his communication array and began composing the standard conquest message. The translation algorithms would convert his words into whatever primitive languages these creatures used. Usually, the mere sight of his ship was enough to convince lesser species to submit without resistance. Greetings, primitive inhabitants of the third planet, Kethvar spoke into the recorder. I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian hegemony. Your world has been selected for integration into our empire. You have one rotation of your star to surrender unconditionally. Comply, and your people will be granted basic rights as laborers. Resist and face extinction. This is your only warning. The message transmitted across the void toward the blue planet the natives called Earth. Kethvar leaned back in his command chair, already making mental notes about resource allocation. The planet showed signs of decent mineral deposits and a large population suitable for manual labor, another successful addition to the hegemony's ever-expanding territory. Meanwhile, on Earth, the message reached the Deep Space Monitoring Station in Australia first. Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing telescope data when the alien transmission came through her equipment. At first, she thought it was interference or maybe a prank from another station. The signal was too clear, too structured to be natural background radiation. This is impossible, she whispered, running the signal through her computers again. The pattern repeated perfectly. It was definitely artificial, definitely from outside the solar system, and according to her instruments, it was being broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously to ensure maximum coverage of Earth. Within hours, the message had been detected by monitoring stations across the globe. Linguists worked frantically to decode the transmission, while government officials debated whether to release the information to the public. The decision was made for them when amateur radio operators around the world began picking up the alien broadcast. The United Nations called an emergency session. Secretary General Maria Santos stood before the General Assembly, holding a translated copy of the alien message. The room fell silent as she read the ultimatum aloud. When she finished, the silence stretched on for nearly a full minute. Then someone in the back row started laughing. It began as a quiet chuckle, but soon spread through the assembly hall. Delegates from nations that had been arguing about trade disputes and territorial claims just hours before now found themselves united by the sheer absurdity of the situation. An alien empire was demanding Earth surrender, apparently unaware that humanity had spent most of its recorded history fighting wars. Well, said the representative from Russia, standing up with a broad grin, this is certainly unexpected. The American delegate nodded. Should we tell them about our nuclear arsenals or let it be a surprise? I vote for surprise, called out someone from the European Union section. Secretary General Santos raised her hand for order, but she was smiling too. Ladies and gentlemen, while this situation is unprecedented, I think we can all agree on our response. The formal reply to the Zephyrian hegemony was drafted within 6 hours. It was remarkably brief. Thank you for the advance notice. We appreciate the warning time. Humanity respectfully declines your offer of surrender. We look forward to meeting you in person. News of the alien ultimatum spread across Earth's communication networks faster than any previous event in human history. Social media exploded with memes featuring stick figures fighting spaceships. Military recruitment offices reported their busiest day in decades. Defense contractors saw their stock prices soar as governments began placing urgent equipment orders. Dr. Chen found herself appointed to a hastily formed scientific advisory committee. Her job was to analyze the alien technology signatures and predict what humanity might be facing. What she discovered in the alien transmission surprised her. Their technology isn't magical, she reported to the Joint Defense Committee. It's advanced, yes, but it follows the same physical laws we understand. Their energy signatures match theoretical models our physicists developed decades ago. We just never had the industrial capacity to build anything this large. The committee chairman, General Morrison, leaned forward. Are you saying we can fight them? I'm saying their ships aren't invulnerable. They're using energy-based systems that our models suggest have specific vulnerabilities. If we can't match their technology directly, maybe we can exploit its weaknesses. Back in space, Kethvar waited for Earth's surrender message. When the human response finally arrived, he read it 3 times before calling his subordinates to the command center. Commander Zekthal, review this transmission, he ordered. The younger officer studied the message and looked confused. Sir, are they accepting our terms? Read it again. Zekthal read more carefully this time. His expression changed from confusion to concern. Sir, I believe they are refusing to surrender. But that's impossible. Our scans show they have no energy weapons, no defensive shields, no faster-than-light capabilities. Kethvar activated his strategic analysis computer. The machine confirmed what his scans had already shown. Humanity possessed only primitive chemical rockets and basic nuclear technology. By every measure the hegemony used to evaluate threats, they should be incapable of meaningful resistance. Perhaps they don't understand the situation. Kethvar decided. Send a follow-up message. Explain more clearly what will happen if they refuse to comply. The second alien message reached Earth 12 hours later. This time, Kethvar had included detailed descriptions of previous conquests and visual records of what happened to species that resisted the hegemony. The images showed devastated worlds and enslaved populations. Humanity's response was even shorter than the first. Message received and understood. Our answer remains the same. Across Earth, preparations began in earnest. Every nation activated defense protocols that had been theoretical exercises just days before. Military engineers pulled out contingency plans designed for impossible scenarios. The global industrial complex began retooling with a speed that surprised even its own managers. Kethvar reviewed the human responses with growing bewilderment. In over 4 decades of conquest, no species had ever rejected the hegemony's offer twice. Most surrendered immediately upon seeing the evidence of their superior technology. The few that initially resisted always changed their minds once they understood the futility of fighting an interstellar empire. Prepare the fleet for standard pacification procedures, he ordered. 12 dreadnoughts should be sufficient for a Class C species. Will arrive in their system in 30 standard days. As the hegemony ships began their journey toward Earth, Kethvar made his final log entry about the upcoming conquest. Target species shows unusual resistance to standard diplomatic pressure. Recommend psychological evaluation of survivors to understand this abnormal behavior. Conquest should proceed normally once superior technology is demonstrated. On Earth, 30 days suddenly seemed like both far too much time and nowhere near enough. Humanity had been given a month to prepare for interstellar war. Around the world, people looked up at the stars with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The aliens had made one critical error in their calculations. They had given humanity advance warning, and humans, as any study of their history would have shown, were remarkably good at making the most of preparation time. 30 days passed faster than anyone expected. The Zephyrian fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, exactly as Ambassador Kethvar had predicted. 12 massive dreadnoughts hung in space, their energy readings visible to every telescope and sensor array humanity had pointed toward the stars. Kethvar stood on his flagship's command bridge, studying the tactical displays. Earth looked exactly as his long-range scans had indicated. The planet showed signs of industrial activity, but nothing that suggested meaningful military capability. A few orbital installations dotted the space around the world, probably communication satellites or primitive research stations. Commander Zekthal, begin standard approach pattern, Kethvar ordered. Maintain distance for now. Let them see our full fleet strength before we make contact. The younger officer nodded and began coordinating the other ships. The hegemony's standard procedure was to establish overwhelming presence before offering final surrender terms. Most species surrendered immediately upon seeing an actual war fleet in their skies. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet." "Already?" Kethvar was surprised. Usually, primitive species needed several hours to overcome their shock before attempting communication. "Play it," a human voice filled the bridge, speaking in heavily accented Zephyrian. "Alien ships, this is Earth Defense Command. You are entering restricted space. Please state your intentions." The bridge fell silent. In 43 previous conquests, no species had ever demanded that hegemony forces state their intentions. Most were too terrified to speak coherently. Respond with standard terms, Kethvar decided. Offer final surrender. If they refuse, begin demonstration bombardment of unpopulated areas. The human response came back within minutes. Surrender offer declined. You may begin your demonstration whenever ready. Kethvar stared at the communication screen. The human seemed almost eager for the demonstration to begin. This was completely outside his experience with primitive species. "Very well," he muttered. "Target that large landmass with minimal population. Show them what our weapons can do." The lead dreadnought's main cannon charged up, its energy readings visible across the electromagnetic spectrum. The weapon fired, sending a concentrated beam of plasma toward an empty section of the Australian continent. The beam struck what appeared to be empty desert and exploded in a brilliant flash visible from orbit. When the energy cleared, a massive crater marked where the blast had hit. The demonstration was perfect, exactly as it had been on 43 other worlds. Kethvar waited for the inevitable surrender message. Instead, Earth Defense Command responded with something no species had ever said before. "Nice shot. Our turn." The first kinetic projectile hit Kethvar's flagship 3 seconds later. The impact threw every Zephyrian on the bridge to the floor. Emergency lights flickered as power systems strained to compensate for the massive damage to the ship's hull. Kethvar pulled himself upright, staring at displays that showed impossible readings. "What hit us?" he demanded. "Scanning now, sir," the tactical officer replied, his voice shaking. "It appears to be a solid projectile, approximately 2 meters long, composed of titanium and tungsten alloys. Impact velocity was significant fraction of light speed. That's impossible. Our scans showed no energy weapons capable of such acceleration. Sir, it wasn't an energy weapon. It was a physical projectile launched from one of their orbital installations." Kethvar activated the external cameras and got his first clear look at Earth's communication satellites. What he had taken for primitive research stations were actually weapons platforms. Humanity had somehow managed to disguise military installations as civilian infrastructure. "How many of these weapons do they have?" "Sir, I'm reading energy signatures from all of their orbital installations. Hundreds of them." More kinetic projectiles began striking the hegemony fleet. Each impact sent shockwaves through ship hulls designed to deflect energy weapons, but never tested against solid matter traveling at relativistic speeds. The Zephyrian shields, designed to disperse plasma and particle beams, offered no protection against telephone pole-sized chunks of metal, moving at 20% of light speed. "Return fire," Kethvar ordered. "Target their orbital weapons." The hegemony ships began firing on the human installations, but something strange happened. Every time they destroyed one weapons platform, another one appeared to take its place. The humans seemed to have an endless supply of orbital installations. "Sir," Commander Zekthal reported, "tactical analysis suggests many of their installations are decoys. We're wasting ammunition on holographic projections." Kethvar felt the first stirring of actual concern. No primitive species had ever used deception on this scale. Most didn't even understand the concept of military strategy beyond basic defense. "Begin planetary bombardment," he decided. "Target their population centers. Force them to surrender to save their cities." The hegemony fleet redirected their weapons toward Earth's major cities. Plasma beams lanced down through the atmosphere, striking the largest human settlements. The energy discharges lit up the planet's night side like artificial suns, but when the light faded, the cities were still there. "Impossible," Kethvar breathed. "Our weapons are designed to level planetary surfaces." "Sir," the sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting massive underground structures beneath each target city." The humans appear to have moved their entire population into subterranean bunkers. When did they have time to build such extensive fortifications? "Unknown, sir. But the energy signatures suggest they've been preparing." for this conflict since our first contact. What Kethvar didn't understand was that humanity had been preparing for this kind of conflict for much longer than 30 days. Every major city on Earth had subway systems, underground shopping centers, basement levels, and maintenance tunnels that could be quickly converted into bomb shelters. Civil defense plans developed during the Cold War were dusted off and implemented with frightening efficiency. More importantly, humanity's industrial capacity had been retooled with a speed that amazed even human observers. Factories that had been producing consumer electronics 30 days ago were now manufacturing military equipment around the clock. Assembly lines that built automobiles were converted to produce weapon systems. The entire planet had become a war machine in less than a month. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the planet," the communications officer announced. "What do they want now?" The human voice was different this time, speaking with calm authority. "Zephyrian Fleet, this is General Morrison, Earth Defense Command. You have now seen a demonstration of our defensive capabilities. We strongly suggest you withdraw from our solar system while your ships are still capable of faster-than-light travel." Kethvar activated his response channel. "You cannot seriously believe your primitive weapons pose a threat to the hegemony fleet. Ambassador Kethvar, we have been monitoring your communications since you entered our system. We know your ship's capabilities, your tactical doctrine, and your standard conquest procedures. We also know you have never encountered a species that fights back effectively." The human somehow knew his name. Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. If the humans could intercept and decode hegemony communications, they had access to tactical information that should have been impossible for a primitive species to obtain. "You are making a grave mistake," Kethvar transmitted. "The hegemony has conquered thousands of worlds. Your resistance will only delay the inevitable." "Perhaps," General Morrison replied, "but you made a much bigger mistake. You gave us 30 days to prepare. And humans, Ambassador, are very good at making the most of preparation time." As if to emphasize the point, another wave of kinetic projectiles struck the hegemony fleet. This time the weapons came from multiple directions simultaneously. The humans had somehow moved their orbital platforms during the battle, creating a three-dimensional crossfire that made evasion nearly impossible. Kethvar watched his tactical displays with growing alarm. 3 of his dreadnoughts were already showing significant damage. Worse, the human weapons seemed to be learning from each exchange, adjusting their targeting to exploit weak points in hegemony ship design. "Sir," Commander Zekthal reported quietly, "recommend we withdraw to a safe distance and call for reinforcements." It was the first time in Kethvar's career that anyone had suggested retreating from a primitive world. But as he watched another kinetic projectile punch through his flagship's secondary hull, he began to wonder if the humans might not be as primitive as they appeared. "Maintain position," he ordered, though his confidence was shaken. "We cannot show weakness to a Class C species." But even as he spoke, Kethvar was beginning to suspect that humanity's classification might need revision. The battle for Earth's orbital space raged for 6 hours before Kethvar admitted the truth he had been avoiding. His fleet was losing. 4 Zephyrian dreadnoughts limped away from Earth with massive hull breaches. The remaining 8 maintained their positions, but their commanders reported ammunition running dangerously low. Worse, the human weapons seemed to be improving with each exchange. Their targeting became more precise, their coordination more sophisticated. "Sir," Commander Zekthal said quietly, "the humans are using tactics I've never encountered before." Kethvar studied his tactical displays with growing confusion. The human defense strategy made no sense according to standard hegemony military doctrine. Instead of concentrating their forces for maximum impact, they spread their weapons across multiple orbital platforms. Instead of targeting the hegemony flagship to disrupt command structure, they focused on engines and weapon systems. "They're not trying to destroy us," he realized aloud. "They're trying to disable us. Sir, look at the targeting patterns. Every shot is aimed at critical systems, not crew compartments. They could have killed thousands of our personnel, but they're deliberately avoiding casualties." It was another unprecedented behavior. Every species the hegemony had encountered fought either with desperate savagery or immediate surrender. None had ever waged war with such calculated restraint. The situation became even more confusing when human ships began appearing in the battle zone. They were small craft, barely larger than hegemony shuttles, but they moved with impossible speed and agility. The human vessels dodged plasma fire that should have vaporized them, using maneuvers that violated several laws of physics. How are they moving like that? Kethvar demanded. Unknown, sir. Their acceleration patterns suggest inertial dampening technology, but our scans show no energy signatures consistent with such systems. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that human pilots had spent decades mastering three-dimensional combat in atmosphere. Fighter jets and spacecraft moved differently, but the basic principles of evasive maneuvering translated surprisingly well to vacuum combat. More importantly, human pilots were trained to think creatively under pressure, a skill that hegemony forces had never needed to develop. The human craft began boarding actions against the damaged Zephyrian ships. Instead of the brutal assault Kethvar expected, the boarding teams acted with surgical precision. They disabled weapon systems, captured key technology, and withdrew before hegemony security forces could mount effective resistance. Sir, we're receiving a communication from one of the boarding teams, the communications officer reported. From our ships? No, sir. From the human boarding team aboard the Conquest of Stars. Kethvar stared at the communication panel. In 43 conquests, no enemy force had ever successfully boarded a hegemony dreadnought. The ships were designed to be impregnable fortresses in space. Put them through. A human voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect Zephyrian. Ambassador Kethvar, this is Captain Sarah Chen, Earth Defense Force. I'm currently aboard your vessel Conquest of Stars. Your crew has been secured and is receiving medical attention for their injuries. Impossible. Our security systems are quite impressive, Captain Chen interrupted, but they're designed to repel energy weapons and standard assault tactics. They weren't built to handle humans with plasma cutters and determination. Kethvar activated his internal sensors, scanning the Conquest of Stars. The readings showed human life signs throughout the ship, but no Zephyrian casualties. Somehow the boarding team had captured an entire dreadnought without killing anyone. What do you want? He asked. To understand your technology. You're faster than light drives, specifically. We'd like to examine them. That information is classified beyond your comprehension level. Actually, Ambassador, we've already figured out the basic principles. Your ships broadcast quite a bit of technical data during normal operations. We just need to see the hardware to confirm our theories. Kethvar felt another chill. If the humans could reverse engineer hegemony FTL technology, the implications were staggering. No primitive species had ever achieved faster than light travel without at least 1,000 years of technological development. Sir, Commander Zekthal whispered, we should call for reinforcements immediately. Before Kethvar could respond, Captain Chen's voice came through the communication system again. Ambassador, you should know that we've been monitoring your transmissions to Hegemony Command. Any reinforcements you call will arrive to find a very different situation than they expect. You cannot possibly intercept our quantum-encrypted communications. You'd be surprised what human cryptographers can accomplish when properly motivated. We broke your communication codes on day 12 of our preparation period. The revelation hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The humans had been listening to Hegemony communications for over 2 weeks. They knew about Hegemony fleet movements, tactical doctrines, and strategic plans. They had been preparing for this battle with complete intelligence about their enemy's capabilities. Sir, the tactical officer called out, sensors are detecting new energy signatures from the planet's surface. Kethvar looked at his displays and felt his last hope crumble. Massive launch facilities were emerging from concealed positions across Earth's continents. Hundreds of spacecraft were lifting off simultaneously, their energy signatures matching captured hegemony technology. How? He whispered. Captain Chen answered as if she had heard him. Human industrial capacity is something most species don't understand, Ambassador. When properly motivated, we can retool our entire civilization in remarkably short periods. We've been reverse engineering your technology since your first message arrived. The human spacecraft were crude compared to Zephyrian vessels, but they were functional. Worse, there were thousands of them. Earth shipyards had been working around the clock for 30 days, producing a fleet that matched the size of entire hegemony battle groups. This is impossible, Kethvar muttered. No species develops space combat capability this quickly. Most species probably don't need to, Captain Chen replied. But humans have been studying warfare for our entire recorded history. We understand strategy, tactics, logistics, and military production better than any species you've previously encountered. It was true, though Kethvar didn't understand the implications. Humanity had spent millennia fighting wars against itself. Every conflict had driven innovation in weapons, tactics, and military organization. Human military doctrine incorporated lessons learned from thousands of battles across every possible terrain and situation. More importantly, human industry had been shaped by centuries of warfare. The ability to rapidly convert civilian production to military hardware wasn't theoretical for humanity. It was a proven capability that had been demonstrated repeatedly throughout their history. "Sir," Commander Zekthal reported, "the humans are requesting permission to dock with our remaining ships." "For what purpose?" "They claim they want to discuss terms." Kethvar almost laughed. The humans wanted to discuss terms? After demonstrating overwhelming tactical superiority, they were offering negotiations instead of demanding surrender. "Let them aboard," he decided. "I need to understand what kind of species we're dealing with." Captain Chen arrived on Kethvar's flagship 30 minutes later, accompanied by a small diplomatic team. She was smaller than most Zephyrians but carried herself with quiet confidence. Her uniform bore insignia that Kethvar didn't recognize, though the hegemony's translation systems identified her rank as equivalent to a fleet commander. "Ambassador," she said, offering a slight bow that somehow managed to be respectful without showing submission. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. You have demonstrated superior tactical capabilities," Kethvar admitted. "What are your terms?" "Actually, we'd like to make you an offer." Kethvar blinked in surprise. In his experience, victorious species either demanded surrender or began immediate conquest. They didn't make offers to defeated enemies. "What kind of offer?" "We'd like to learn about the galaxy beyond our solar system. Your hegemony has obviously achieved interstellar civilization. We're interested in peaceful contact with other species." "You want peaceful contact? After defeating our invasion fleet?" Captain Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and slightly predatory. "Ambassador, you declared war on us. We didn't choose this conflict, but now that it's over, we see no reason to continue hostilities. The hegemony will send more fleets. Probably. But before they arrive, we'll have reverse-engineered your technology completely. More importantly, we'll have had time to contact the other species in your empire, the ones you've conquered over the centuries." Kethvar felt a new kind of fear growing in his chest. "What do you mean?" "We mean, Ambassador, that humanity doesn't believe in empires. We prefer voluntary cooperation between equal partners. We suspect many of your conquered species might prefer that arrangement as well." For the first time in his career, Kethvar wondered if the hegemony might have chosen the wrong planet to conquer. The Hegemony High Command received Kethvar's first distress signal 3 days after the battle for Earth ended. Emperor Vexanthus read the report twice before calling an emergency session of his war council. The message seemed impossible to believe. 12 dreadnoughts defeated by a primitive species? General Thekmor shook his massive head. "Ambassador Kethvar must be suffering from combat stress." "Request clarification." Emperor Vexanthus activated the communication array. "Ambassador Kethvar, explain your situation. How can a Class C species pose any threat to hegemony forces?" The response came back 6 hours later. This time, Kethvar's voice carried a tone the Emperor had never heard from one of his ambassadors. Uncertainty mixed with genuine fear. "Your Majesty, I must revise my assessment of the human species. They are not Class C. I'm not certain what classification they should receive, but they are far more dangerous than our initial analysis suggested." "Explain." "They reverse-engineered our technology in less than 30 days. They defeated our fleet using weapons we didn't know existed. Most importantly, they fight like no species we've ever encountered. They actually seem to enjoy combat." Emperor Vexanthus exchanged glances with his war council. In 300 years of hegemony expansion, no species had ever reverse-engineered their technology. Most couldn't even understand the basic principles behind faster-than-light travel. "Ambassador, are you certain about their technological capabilities?" "Your Majesty, I am currently aboard a human vessel that is traveling faster than light using our own drive technology. They not only understood our systems, they improved them. Their version is 20% more efficient than our original design." The War Council chamber fell silent. If the humans could improve hegemony technology, they possessed scientific capabilities that rivaled the Empire's best researchers. More troubling, they had achieved this advancement in a matter of weeks rather than centuries. "Where are you now?" the Emperor asked. "Approaching the Centauri system, Your Majesty." The humans insisted on visiting the Kentari colonies. Emperor Vexanthus felt his blood pressure spike. The Kentari were one of the hegemony's oldest conquests, absorbed into the empire over 2 centuries ago. They provided essential agricultural products for dozens of hegemony worlds. If the humans interfered with Kentari production, Ambassador, under no circumstances are you to allow the humans to make contact with conquered populations. The stability of the empire depends on maintaining existing colonial relationships. Kethavar's response carried a bitter laugh. "Your Majesty, I'm a prisoner aboard a human ship. I have no authority to prevent anything. The humans do whatever they choose to do." The transmission ended, leaving the War Council staring at each other in shock. In 3 centuries of expansion, no hegemony ambassador had ever reported being held prisoner by a primitive species. "Send the 4th Fleet to Centauri immediately," Emperor Vexanthus ordered. "If these humans want to interfere with our colonies, they'll learn why the hegemony has ruled the galaxy for 300 years. Admiral Karethval received her orders within the hour. "Take 48 dreadnoughts to the Centauri system. Destroy the human ships. Restore order to the Kentari colonies." The Admiral had overseen dozens of suppression campaigns. This should be a routine operation. But when the 4th Fleet arrived at Centauri, they found something unprecedented in hegemony history. The Kentari were no longer working in their assigned agricultural facilities. Instead, they were gathered in massive crowds around human landing sites, listening to speeches about freedom and self-determination. "Admiral," Captain Urektal reported from the lead dreadnought, "the situation on Kentari 3 is, unusual." "Explain." "The humans have been broadcasting to the planetary population for several days. They're claiming that the Kentari have the right to govern themselves. The local population appears to be responding positively to this message." Admiral Karethval studied her tactical displays. The human ships were smaller than hegemony vessels, but there were far more of them than intelligence reports had suggested. Worse, they were using advanced evasion patterns that suggested significant combat experience. "Broadcast standard compliance demands to the planet," she ordered. "All species are to return to their assigned duties immediately." The response came not from the Kentari, but from the human fleet commander. "Admiral Karethval, this is Captain Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Force. The Kentari people have voted to declare independence from the hegemony. We are here to support their right to self-determination. The Kentari are property of the hegemony. They have no rights to self-determination. Actually, Admiral, we've checked galactic law on this subject. The hegemony's conquests violate 17 different interstellar treaties. The Kentari have every legal right to independence." Admiral Karethval paused. In 300 years, no species had ever challenged the legal basis of hegemony expansion. Most conquered populations didn't even understand the concept of interstellar law. The hegemony does not recognize the authority of interstellar courts. That's unfortunate, Admiral, because we do. And so do the Kentari, and so do about 40 other species we've contacted in the past week. The Admiral felt a chill run down her spine. "What other species?" "The Ulani from the Vega system send their regards. So do the Mortak from the Rigel colonies. Oh, and the Zephyrians from your home system are particularly interested in meeting with us." Admiral Karethval stared at her communication display in horror. The humans had contacted the Zephyrian home system? The very heart of the hegemony empire? That's impossible. You couldn't have reached our core world so quickly. Admiral, you underestimate human industrial capacity. We've been building ships for 2 weeks now. Our current fleet numbers approximately 3,000 vessels. We've sent diplomatic missions to every major hegemony territory. 3,000 ships. The number was staggering. The entire hegemony fleet numbered fewer than 2,000 vessels, accumulated over 3 centuries of expansion. The humans had built a larger fleet in 14 days than the Empire had constructed in 300 years. "Sir," Captain Urektal whispered, "recommend we call for reinforcements immediately." But before Admiral Karethval could respond, her tactical officer made an announcement that changed everything. "Admiral, we're receiving transmission from the hegemony home system. It's marked as Priority 1 from Emperor Vexanthus himself." The message was brief and devastating. "All fleets return to core territories immediately. We are under attack." Admiral Korethaval read the message 3 times before its implications sank in. The humans hadn't just visited hegemony territories. They had somehow convinced conquered species to revolt simultaneously across the entire empire. 300 years of careful expansion was collapsing in a matter of days. "Captain Rodriguez," she transmitted to the human fleet commander. "What do you want?" "That's simple, Admiral. We want the hegemony to stop conquering other species. We want all conquered populations to have the choice of independence, and we want to establish peaceful relations between all galactic species. The Emperor will never agree to those terms. Then the Emperor will find himself ruling a much smaller empire than he expects. Admiral, we've been studying your history since we captured Ambassador Kethvar. The hegemony has conquered over 400 species in 3 centuries. Most of them never wanted to be part of your empire in the first place. It was true, though no hegemony officer had ever said it aloud. Most conquered species submitted because they had no choice, not because they wanted to join the empire. Given an alternative, many would probably choose independence. What happens to hegemony citizens if the empire dissolves? Nothing bad, Admiral. We're not interested in conquest or revenge. We just want every species to have the right to choose their own government. If Zephyrians want to maintain their empire, they're welcome to do so, but only with species that voluntarily choose to participate. Admiral Korethaval looked around her bridge at officers who had spent their entire careers serving the hegemony. For the first time in 3 centuries, they were facing an enemy that didn't want to destroy them. It was almost more terrifying than facing annihilation. "What guarantee do we have that you won't attack hegemony core worlds?" "You have our word, Admiral. Humans don't attack species that aren't attacking others, but we will defend any species that asks for our help." As if to demonstrate the point, Kentari ships began launching from the planet's surface. They were small craft, obviously civilian vessels converted for basic defense. But there were hundreds of them, and they moved with the coordination of people fighting for their freedom rather than their conquest. Admiral Korethaval realized that everything had changed. The galaxy would never be the same again. Emperor Vexanthus stood in his throne room, staring at reports that seemed impossible to believe. In 3 weeks, the hegemony had lost control of over 60% of its territories. Conquered species across the galaxy were declaring independence with human support. Even worse, many Zephyrian citizens were questioning whether the Empire should continue its conquest policies. "Your Majesty," General Techmore approached the throne with obvious reluctance. "The situation continues to deteriorate. We've lost contact with 17 more colonies in the past day. How many ships do we have left?" "Approximately 400 vessels remain under hegemony control. However, most of our remaining fleet commanders are requesting permission to negotiate with human forces rather than engage in combat." Emperor Vexanthus closed his eyes. In 3 centuries of rule, no hegemony officer had ever requested permission to negotiate with an enemy. The very concept was foreign to imperial military doctrine. "And our core systems?" "Secure for now, Your Majesty. But human ships have been detected at the edges of 6 home system territories. They're not attacking, but they're broadcasting messages about freedom and self-determination." The Emperor activated his personal communication array. "Get me Ambassador Kethvar." The response came almost immediately. Kethvar appeared on the main display, but he looked different. Less formal somehow. He was standing in what appeared to be a human ship's conference room, with several human officers visible in the background. "Your Majesty," Kethvar said, offering a bow that seemed more respectful than subservient. "Ambassador, I need to understand what we're dealing with. Are these humans planning to conquer the galaxy?" "No, Your Majesty. They've made that very clear. They have no interest in conquest. They want something far more dangerous than that." "Explain." "They want every species to choose its own government. They believe that conquest is morally wrong, regardless of who's doing it. They're offering an alternative to imperial expansion." Emperor Vexanthus felt a chill. An alternative to conquest was indeed more dangerous than any military threat. If species could achieve prosperity and security without joining the hegemony, the entire imperial system would become obsolete. "What are their terms for peace?" "They want to meet with you directly, Your Majesty. They're proposing something they call the Sol Accords, a galactic treaty that would establish voluntary cooperation between species instead of conquest-based expansion." "Voluntary cooperation? How can an empire function without conquered territories?" A new voice answered from behind Kethvar. A human stepped into view. wearing a uniform that marked her as some kind of senior officer. Emperor Vexanthus, I'm Secretary General Maria Santos of the United Nations. Perhaps I can explain. The Emperor stared at the human. She was smaller than most Zephyrians, but carried herself with quiet authority. More unsettling, she spoke as an equal rather than a supplicant. Secretary General Santos, you've destroyed 3 centuries of imperial expansion in less than a month. What do you want? Actually, Your Majesty, we want to invite you to something better. On Earth, we've learned that voluntary cooperation is far more effective than forced compliance. Species that choose to work together accomplish more than species that are forced to serve an empire. Impossible. Without conquest, how do you acquire resources? How do you maintain order? How do you expand your territory? We trade for resources. We maintain order through mutual agreement and law. And we expand our knowledge rather than our territory. Emperor Vexanthus activated his historical database, searching for examples of successful voluntary cooperation between species. The results were troubling. In several cases, voluntary alliances had proven more stable and prosperous than conquered territories. What happens to the hegemony if we accept these soul accords? The hegemony continues to exist, Your Majesty, but only with species that choose to remain part of it. Many probably will. Zephyrian technology and organization have benefits that many species appreciate. The difference is that membership becomes voluntary rather than forced. And if species choose to leave, then they leave. But they remain part of the galactic community. They can still trade with the hegemony. They can still cooperate on mutual interest. They just won't be conquered territories anymore. General Theckamore stepped forward. Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider their proposal. Our current situation is unsustainable. We've lost too many territories to continue fighting. Emperor Vexanthus looked around his throne room at advisors who had served the Empire for decades. For the first time in his reign, he saw doubt in their eyes. The humans had done more than defeat hegemony military forces. They had challenged the fundamental assumptions that held the Empire together. Very well, he decided. I will meet with human representatives to discuss these soul accords. But I want guarantees that Zephyrian core worlds will remain secure. Secretary General Santos smiled. Your Majesty, we have no interest in threatening Zephyrian security. We want Zephyrians to be prosperous and safe. We just want every other species to have the same opportunities. The meeting took place 3 days later aboard a neutral station at the edge of Zephyrian space. Emperor Vexanthus arrived with a full diplomatic escort, expecting formal negotiations that would take weeks to complete. Instead, he found himself in a conference room with representatives from dozens of species, many of whom had been hegemony subjects just days before. Your Majesty, Secretary General Santos began, welcome to the First Galactic Assembly. Every species here has sent representatives to help design a new framework for interstellar relations. The Emperor looked around the room and realized he was seeing something unprecedented. Species that had been conquered enemies were sitting peacefully with their former rulers. Kentari representatives sat next to Zephyrian diplomats. Yulani delegates shared tables with their former hegemony overseers. How is this possible? He asked. Captain Sarah Chen, the human officer who had captured his fleet at Earth, answered from across the table. Your Majesty, it turns out that most species want the same basic things: security, prosperity, and the freedom to develop their own cultures. When you stop trying to conquer each other, it's remarkably easy to find common ground. The Soul Accords were simpler than any treaty Emperor Vexanthus had ever seen. 3 basic principles. No species could conquer another. All species had the right to self-determination, and interstellar disputes would be resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. What enforcement mechanism exists for these accords? He asked. The same enforcement that exists for any law, Your Majesty, Secretary General Santos replied. The collective agreement of civilized species to uphold them. Plus, of course, the fact that any species that violates the accords will find itself facing human opposition. It was a polite way of saying that humanity would serve as the galaxy's peacekeepers. Emperor Vexanthus studied the human representatives and realized they were perfectly suited for the role. They had demonstrated overwhelming military capability, but preferred negotiation to warfare. They could defeat any aggressor but had no interest in conquest. Very well, he said at last. The hegemony accepts the Soul Accords. The signing ceremony took place on Earth in the same United Nations building where humanity had first received the hegemony's ultimatum. Ambassador Kethvar stood beside Secretary General Santos as hundreds of species representatives signed the treaty that would reshape galactic civilization. "Ambassador," Santos said quietly, "do you understand what happened here?" Kethvar nodded slowly. "We made the classic mistake. We thought humanity was prey. Actually, Ambassador, that wasn't your mistake. Your mistake was thinking that predators and prey were the only options. Humans aren't predators. We're gardeners. Gardeners. We prefer to help things grow rather than consume them. It turns out that's a much more effective approach to galactic civilization." Years later, Kethvar would teach courses at the Galactic Diplomatic Academy about what became known as the human lesson. The central principle was simple. Never mistake a species' restraint for weakness, and never assume that their lack of conquest means inability to wage war. But the most important lesson, the one that transformed galactic civilization, was that there were alternatives to conquest. Species could cooperate, trade, and grow together without anyone being conquered or enslaved. The galaxy was a much more interesting place when everyone had the freedom to contribute their best ideas, rather than simply serving someone else's empire. And humanity, the species that had been dismissed as primitive just months before, became the galaxy's most respected mediators, peacekeepers, and gardeners of civilization. The hegemony still existed, but now it was a voluntary alliance of species that chose to work together. It was smaller than the old empire, but far more stable and prosperous. Most importantly, it was a galaxy where species could develop their potential without fear of conquest. And that, as humans had proven, made everyone stronger.